Hey there, listeners. We're kicking off this next season of the JJLP with a conversation about reading. Reading as a habit, as a discipline, as a tool for growth and spiritual formation, and as a way to form community. So whether you're an avid reader like my guest or a sometime reader like me, you're going to appreciate this conversation that goes deep and wide. So let's push play on that right now. Why don't you start off by telling us your name, what you do, and how long you've been doing it?
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, my name's Tyler. I serve at River Valley Church, so I'm a pastor. And I also coach soccer at North Valley High School. So those are kind of the main things that I'm up to these days.
How long have you been doing these things?
10 years. It's about...
For both?
Yeah. It all lined up about the same time. So that would have been November 2013.
Wow.
September, excuse me.
Okay.
So yeah, about 10 years.
Mm.
Or is it 9? No, that's 10. Yeah.
Now, we've been friends for a number of years. I don't know how many years we've been friends. But one thing I've known about you is that you read a lot. And when I was able to zoom in on how much you read, I realized it's not just a lot, but especially relative to me, you read a whole lot, again, compared to me. Although I've been surprised, there are folks out there in my inner circle of acquaintances who do read a lot. So maybe I'm a little more abnormal. And anyway, why don't you, just so that our listeners can kind of gauge where they are in relation to me, I read maybe, I don't know, maybe I'll complete 6 books a year. Maybe. I don't know. Depending
Really?
on the book.
I bet you do more than that.
Well, I like to read fiction, and those ones I'll read a little bit faster, but it's hard for me to find a really good one.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll scan a lot of news articles, so I've learned to read fast.
Mm-hmm.
But nonfiction, unless I'm reading with some friends or a small group, I don't read very much. So, I mean, that's just I don't know how many I actually read. But, so how many books would you say you read a month?
A month. So let's see here. I probably do like 70 to 80 a year.
Mm-hmm.
So what's that divided by 12? You're
I don't know, man.
There are people screaming into the podcast right now.
Yeah.
And,
Okay. So 10 books a month would be 120.
okay, good. So 8 would be 100, right? Ish.
I don't know.
8 books a month. So that probably comes out to like, what? So 5 times 12 is 60. So yeah, maybe 6 or 7
Okay.
books a month.
Yeah.
And that I do include, fiction in that.
Sure.
Although I don't read a ton of fiction, but I should do more. Yeah, I used to read more, but as often happens when you have children, we had our daughter this last year.
All right.
And that disrupts your life and pursuits in some significant and special ways.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's been a little bit less than it.
So 6 to 7 books a month is Tyler as a dad kind of level. What do you remember? How much has that changed from before Tyler was a dad?
So I had a couple years like in that transition between single to married of, I think I did 2 or 3 years of 100 books.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a goal. It was a thing I wanted to do
For the year. Mm-hmm.
And, but so that was a unique time in my life. But yeah, you and I probably have friends that do that every year, which is pretty incredible.
So why do you read so many books? And particularly, I'm interested, is this like nurture or nature? Is this something you wanted to do and you had to learn how to do it? Or is this just kind of part of your personality? So why do you read and where do you think that stems from?
Yeah, nature versus nurture. I mean, at a younger age, I was doing a lot of reading in the library, and there's all sorts of reading challenges. So I'm a pretty competitive person. So I was always trying to win at those and win the prizes and stuff. But so as I think back, I did a lot of reading when I was younger. So, and I guess that'd be somewhat nature, but nurture elements too. But yeah, once I stopped going to school and once they stopped forcing me to read books I didn't want to read, I was able to read books I wanted to read or books I felt were enriching or helpful to me and to what I do here at the church. And that, and to talk about them. So I think that's a big part of it is just that, just the way it enriches my life. And I mean, we have to say I have a pretty unique job as a pastor. Like part of my job is reading and whether that's, about the Bible or the culture or what's going on in the world. So I do have a freedom and flexibility that maybe others don't have with what I get to do. Even like a little bit of a book budget on staff here. And so I really appreciate that.
Yeah. So there's a little bit of that part of you that maybe a little bit of the competitive part that used to kind of help push you along. But now you don't have school, you don't have anyone on top of you except maybe the desire to be the best at your job that you can be. Maybe there's a little, but it sounds like on the whole, you're reading because you really want to. And the books that you're reading are ones that you desire to read and you don't have to read. Is that what I understand?
That's right. Although, in church world, and you probably experience this too, lots of people are like, hey, Josh, you need to read this. Hey, Josh, you need to read this. Hey, Tyler, pastor, read this book that changed my life. And I always appreciate book recommendations, but it can be a lot when they start to stack up.
So I'm pretty open about this now because I used to feel like I should be reading more. But now when someone does that, I kind of say, you know what? I'm not very good at finishing books, but I am interested in why this book has stood out to you. Would you tell me
I like that.
What is sticking with you from this book? Because that's the only reason I would read this book is because it's meaningful to you. So my little shortcut is, why don't you just tell me what has stood out to you from this book? And that might be a better way for me to interact with this book that otherwise it'll just sit on my shelf.
Right.
And I'll just feel guilty about having not read that. But it sounds like you read the books that are recommended to you.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes. Yeah. Sometimes someone will hand me a book that's like 300 pages and I'm like doing the math on how many hours that's going to take. And it's a significant investment of time.
Yeah.
So yeah, if it resonates, if it catches my attention, if it's maybe relevant to where we are as a church, or, proximity to my life. So if you're like one of my key leaders, someone recently said, hey, could you read this? And it was a short book too. And I didn't want to read it, but it was something that this leader was really wrestling through. And so it's more of an act of like, okay, like let's process this together. And like I said, thankfully it was a short book, but so I probably read a quarter of what people recommend.
Yeah. How do you choose the books that you read?
I think it's just those that catch my interest.
I mean, so where are books catching your interest? Are you walking through bookstores? Are you browsing Amazon?
Where
are you reading like some person you respect, reading their top 10 lists? Or I mean, how are you finding your books? And so how they have the chance to catch your attention?
That's a good question. So I think a lot of it is, you might laugh, is Twitter.
Okay. Yeah.
So just lots of or online, books that are kind of in our world and in Christian world that are maybe causing a little bit of a stir, or there's a lot of conversation around them. I'll see like recommendations online, or sometimes they are recommendations of people at our church or those on staff here. They're like, oh man, this book's really impacting me. I think it's mostly through like circles of online influences that are maybe interesting to me.
And it sounds like you do. Most of your books are nonfiction.
Probably.
How do you kind of cycle? Is for the fiction stuff, is that also you just see things recommended, or is there a particular author, authors that you follow or series that you follow? How do do you have a formula for, you read the 3 of these for one of these, or is it just kind of how they come to you?
Yeah, just probably how they come to me. And my fiction reading, some people are really developed in their fiction reading. Mine is, John Grisham books, probably, or
what would develop, from your point of view, what does it mean to be a developed?
like if you're reading like, I don't know, like Pride and Prejudice. Or,
okay, yeah, like you're reading kind of the classics, Tolstoy or Austen or
Totally,
sure.
Yeah. Whereas I feel like my fiction reading habits are more like my Netflix watching habits of just what's entertaining, or even almost like a way to escape, but in a good way, like to engage imagination.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't read as much fiction as I would like to. And every time I do read fiction, I'm like, oh, this is a different experience of reading that engages my mind in different ways. And you read those books a lot faster because they're more enjoyable to read.
Yeah. So, I mean, the Grisham ones are, they're fun, but there is some of those authors, there's a certain level of kind of copy and pasting plot points, and which is, let's be honest, that's kind of, Shakespeare did that well, kind of copy and pasted other plots into his own words. And so it works, there's patterns for what works for us, but there's something nice about the predictability of some of those books,
That's true. There is kind of a universal plot line, or just maybe a couple different ones, right? That we've been recycling ever since.
Yeah. Is there any book on your shelf that you've had there for a while and haven't read?
I think I've read most of them, but that's because if I haven't read it and I don't really want to, I might find a new home for it.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
But that's a great question. I'll have to think more about it. It's kind of like if you haven't seen a certain movie and you mention it like at a party and everyone's like, what? You haven't seen Dumb and Dumber? Yeah. The one that I always use it, and everyone thinks you're like missing out on life. I'm trying to think what that book might be, but
if it comes back around, let us know. But so where do you find time to read? You mentioned that you have parts of your job that you can dedicate time to reading on the job that relates to your work. But I'm curious about, in general, in your life, do you have patterns that you follow, or are you more of an opportunistic reader? Like whenever you have a few minutes, you just jump in.
A little bit of both. So the patterns be like, I like to read in the morning when my mind is freshest. There's just maybe a chapter of something or two. And then, before bed, best case scenario, sometimes it's TV or whatever, but, maybe read for a few minutes, some biography or something before bed. And then, audiobooks throughout the day, sometimes whether I'm driving or exercising. And then, if I'm like working on a sermon or whatever, then lots of reading throughout the day, but mostly reading in the morning.
Are you usually multitasking as it relates to your books? Are you reading multiple books at the same time, or are you trying to get through one before going to the other?
Yeah, probably multitasking because they're all very different. Like right now I'm reading a biography from Elizabeth Elliot. Reading some commentaries for Deuteronomy.
Is that the teaching series that you're in right now?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry. Should have mentioned that. And then, what else am I working through? A Craig Groeschel Habits book. And that book that one of my leaders was asking me to read. It's diverse enough, but I try and not maybe read like 2 books on habits at the same time, because then, or 2 books on any topic at the same time, because then I'll confuse them and it kind of mix them up. So they're diverse enough, I think. But I do feel like I have a little bit of a restlessness sometimes, and so it's easier for me to read 5 chapters, or 1 chapter from 5 different books in a day, and 5 chapters in 1 book. Maybe that's a personality thing.
Yeah. Are the people in your family or are the people in your world, your closest relationships, are you part of a community of readers, or is this something that's kind of Tyler's habit?
Yeah. My family, we're often talking about books, passing books around. Our staff here, we talk about books a lot. The pastors group that I'm a part of with you and several of our friends, we got together over a book, which is a really good experience. I love reading books in community where we can talk about it and process it and pull different things.
Yeah, you guys help me finish books.
Yeah, exactly. There's more incentive.
There we go.
When if you show up, hey, who read the chapter? Oh, Rex didn't read it again.
Yeah.
Just kidding, Rex. But there is an advantage to that. So yeah, I'd say for the most part, many of the people in my lives are readers, and that helps spur one another on.
Let's see. I'm curious how you have seen books form your life.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Josh Johnson.
Because from my point of view, because I'm a slower reader, or I don't know, I'm still trying to figure out why it is I don't read as much as I should, and I've started to let go of that should, because, and I just to say I don't read books as much,
Sure.
Let it be that. But I think one of the reasons is because I try to read in a way where I'm giving this author as much of a chance to form me, tell me what, teach me, and give space for their words, to impact me or form me or settle kind of into the different parts of my life is, ideally what I'm hoping for. So when I hear about people who read so many books, I'm a bit skeptical, like, man, that book that you read in a minute, I'm still working through, and it is like blowing my world up. How did you just cruise through it, And so I'm kind of curious, for folks who read a lot of books, like how do those books form you? Or maybe it's just the habit of reading that is the thing that forms you. Anyway, interact with that a little bit.
I love that question.
Yeah.
Because that's important to think about. Okay, how is this forming me as a person? And I think reading in general, like sitting down, opening a book, that kind of reading, it forces us to slow down and to cultivate some patience. You're submitting yourself to someone else's words and ideas, and you're kind of in conversation with them, even though they're not sitting with you. I think it forms us in vocabulary. It gives us new thoughts and words, images, ideas to process. But I think the biggest thing for me is just teaching me to like slow down and look at the way someone else is processing the world. To see things through someone else's eyes. But I love what you're saying about like letting not just reading, but letting like the reading kind of permeate and percolate. I know we all read at different speeds. We all process things differently. And then you'll be like reading a book, and then maybe it just doesn't resonate that much, but maybe you come back to it 5 years later.
Yeah.
And it's hitting you in some profound ways.
I've had books that were just the greatest when I read it 15 years ago. And I think I should read that again because it was the greatest. And, you come back to it and you're like, wow, what? The magic's gone,
So interesting.
Or vice versa,
There really is something to that like books are contextual or seasonal. It's I think I was mentioning to you this book, Sacred Fire. It's just kind of about that trend, like some of the things we struggle with as in the second part of our life, or the middle part of life. And if I had read that 10, 20 years ago, wouldn't have meant much. But now I'm like, all this is very relevant to, stepping into this middle season of life, where you have less opportunities, but you have, some really important relationships and people who rely on you. And
how old are you?
I am 33.
Okay.
Jesus' age. He died.
Big year. It's a big year.
Hope I make it.
Yeah. What's funny about that book is that you mentioned Sacred Fire is I've wanted to have read that book for a couple of years especially because my thing, I have a degree in spiritual formation, and I'm really interested in how people change. And I remember that this book seemed to address kind of how people change or spiritual formation at different stages of life. And I thought that would be a good book for me to read. Tyler's read it. I can borrow it from him, so I don't have to invest any money, because I also am notorious for buying books because I hear an author on a podcast, get his book because he sounds great, and then it just sits there, and I end up passing it on because I just never get it going. Anyway, that book is still sitting on my shelf, and I'm like, I need to give that back to Tyler sometime. And I haven't even like cracked the first page.
That's funny.
And it's just this ongoing rust. So that it's just kind of funny, the different personalities.
Yeah.
You know, like me next to you, and the different way we interact with books. Like, so that was
so funny because I'm
example.
like Sacred Fire. As I read it, I think of Josh Johnson.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because you're already doing it and you're already like in that kind of work.
Sure.
So I'm like, oh man, I would love for Josh to read it, but you know.
I got it. Okay.
It's no pressure.
I know. I'm like, should I make some kind of vow? But I don't think I should, because
poverty and silence.
Like I will finish that book, Tyler. I will. But it was funny that you brought that book up. Well, so think about books that, you know, if you can look back in the last decade of your life or so, whatever. What books stand out that really were kind of highlights on your timeline as a reader of books, ones that just kind of stand out in contrast? And I'd be also interested to know if there's any books that you have intentionally reread and would be willing to read it a third time or a fourth time.
Yeah, this was a good question, and I need to go back through. Maybe I was telling you, maybe I'll do a blog post or something of my favorite books over the last decade. But just maybe a couple come to mind. One that's just really good for Christians, non-Christians, anybody. It's good for everybody. Is Jonathan Haidt's The Righteous Mind?
Okay.
Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. He's a...
how recent was that? Do you have a sense?
2006?
Okay,
maybe?
so before 2016.
It was before 2016, and it was prophecy. I mean, and this guy is an atheist. He's a psychologist. But, you know, he was in his like more academic, atheistic, more liberal environments and couldn't understand conservatives at all, and started to do some research on just our moral intuitions, and was really blown away by how all of us make decisions and live in a certain way, not based on rationality, but based on kind of inner, passion, desire, molding. Anyway, it's an incredible book that really like kind of helps you see and helps define some of our political moments too.
I imagine as a pastor that might even give you a little bit more room to have compassion for someone that
totally.
maybe is really fired up about a particular point, you know, to have that. Yeah. So, okay. Jonathan Haidt's that
The
book.
Righteous
Okay.
Mind. For me, J.I. Packer's Knowing God is kind of a classic, and that's been formational, just in having a bigger view of who God is and how he wants to relate to us. James Smith.
Sorry. I remember you blogging about that, and I thought, I've heard of J.I. Packer, and my friend Tyler is really into it, so I bought that book, and I started it, and I just couldn't get into it, man. And
Knowing God.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's just.
I know. Yeah. That's a good reminder, too. I'm glad you said that for listeners, because these are books that have impacted me in my life. And sometimes people who I like hang with, they talk about Calvin's Institutes, right?
Okay.
That's like the big, it's like 1,000 pages, right?
John Calvin, kind of the founder of the Reformed.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
And so I like bought it, and I took a year and I read it, and I didn't understand a thing. I didn't enjoy it at all. And so it's a good reminder that not all of these books are,
and the Jonathan Haidt's one and the Packer one, are these ones that you read? You're not too. I mean, school for you was relatively recent. Well, I don't know, when did you?
Yeah, so I graduated from undergrad in 2013, and then did grad school right after that online. So, I was kind of in grad school around this
I don't know
time.
if these books are books that you were required to read. and then it ended up being
No.
great. Okay, so these are books you kind of.
I don't think
Okay.
I was required to read those ones.
Okay. Do you have another one?
Yeah, so James K. A. Smith,
That's
he
right.
has several books. Desiring the Kingdom would be the more heady version, and the more like lay version would be You Are What You Love.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just formational for me in understanding like habits and how we are. He calls us liturgical animals.
Okay.
And what he means by that is we are creatures of habit. We're formed by our habits. So I can say I believe something, but what I repeatedly do is really a better representation of who I am, and it's going to form me into a certain kind of a person.
Mm-hmm.
So in our Christian circles, we often think you are what you think, but he's arguing, no, we are what we love, and we love what we repeatedly do.
Yeah.
And so it really changed a paradigm for me in ministry, because sometimes, we think we got to get people the right information, but usually in our lives, it's not a lack of information. It's a lack of motivation.
Yeah.
Like for reading.
Yeah. Exactly. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
So those are a few books maybe that come to mind.
Yeah. Any books that you could think of that you have intentionally reread and would be willing to read again?
Sacred Fire is one that I'll probably go back to.
Once you get back from me.
Yeah, once I get it back from you.
Couple years out.
No, I bought a digital copy.
Yeah.
It's a good book if you want like multiple copies of it, and you hand it out evangelistically.
Oh, nice.
So I'm happy for my
Yeah.
copy of Sacred Fire to sit on your bookshelf.
Sweet. Thank you. Okay. So Sacred Fire, you've already read it a second time?
I've used it as reference.
Okay.
Oh, Rollheiser says this about blessing. I need to go look that up. But yeah, so that would be one I'd probably go back to and read. John Mark Comer has a real good book on hurry, the ruthless elimination of hurry. That is worth rereading. A lot of stuff from Eugene Peterson. Although I will say sometimes when I go back and reread a book, the first time through, I try and write some notes in there. And then the second time through, I might not read everything, but I'll kind of read what resonated with me back then.
Okay.
And that might be, so it might be a little bit more like scanning.
So Eugene Peterson, you mentioned, like, so he has a couple books that you have gone back to.
Yeah. So
You didn't give me a particular book. You just said Eugene Peterson.
Yeah.
That meant he was a category unto himself of books that you have reread.
yeah, he's got a real good book called The Contemplative Pastor. That book has some real good things, not just for those in ministry, but any leader. He has a book called Working the Angles, and we mentioned how so many books are contextual or seasonal, and that was the one I read right in the middle of COVID, like right in March or April. And he just had this idea of paying attention was just one of the themes of that book, and how scripture reading is paying attention to God. Spiritual formation is paying attention to or spiritual direction is paying attention to what God's doing in you. And then prayer would be like paying attention to what God's doing in me. And so pretty much all these Christian practices, he was talking through the lens of attention, and I thought that's really helpful. And so yeah, there's another one that came to mind.
Yeah. Okay. So here are a couple questions that I don't know if they're going to be controversial or not.
Ooh, controversy.
But it's, when somebody thinks about reading a book, usually they think about opening up something made of paper, and reading it.
Sure.
So does listening to an audiobook count as reading a book?
Who's counting?
Yeah, I don't know. Right now, Tyler Goens is you mentioned earlier that about a book that you read that you listened to when you went for a run. So I think for you, we probably would say, yeah, listening to a book being read to you,
sure,
is reading a book.
Yeah, I count listening to a book as reading it. There are advantages and disadvantages to listening to a book, especially nonfiction. And we can talk about that if you want to. But yeah, I would count it. I'd count listening to a book as reading it. It is funny though. So have you ever listened to an audiobook and they go through and change the word reading to listening? In a lot of them, not all of them do this, but they literally change the books. Like if the author is reading the book and, and they're reading the book. And so as you were reading this chapter, they'll literally change it to as you were listening to this chapter.
Oh, no.
Pretty fascinating.
Okay.
So that they actually go through and change it, which I don't know.
Was there a potential rabbit trail that you said about something about nonfiction or?
Oh, sure.
We wanted to go.
Advantages and disadvantages of listening. So I found that as I'm listening to nonfiction, it's a lot easier for my mind to wander and I lose track of where the book's going, especially if you're multitasking versus if you're sitting in the chair, looking at words on a page, a little easier to pay attention. But, man, what a resource for those who normally don't have time to read. And now there's all sorts of opportunities to get through books that they would have never been able to.
It might connect to what's your motivation for reading or what's the point of reading for you. And sometimes it sounds like the way reading has formed you is forcing you to slow down. So, when you do open up a book, a real book, you're being forced to slow down and pay attention in a different way. So that can be, anyway, I was just trying, if you're just wanting to get this book into you, to hear this book, to hear this argument played out or this story played out, then yeah, read it, listen to it, whatever works to kind of give that author a fair hearing. You know?
And if there's a book that I'm like, I should read that, I should be aware of that book for my job or for whatever. But it's not like super interesting to me. I might do the audiobook version just because and I could listen to it a little faster, maybe 1.5 speed or something. But if it's like, this book looks really fascinating, maybe I'll get the hard copy.
I've never listened to something at 1.5 speed.
You haven't?
I'm a bit nervous about that.
Really?
Like,
it will change your life,
you can still get the gist of a book. Yeah. That kind of connects to this next question. Does scanning a book count as reading a book? And again, it depends on what your motivation is in opening up this book.
Totally.
The
late Tim Keller he used to read about 80 books a year, he said. And he would read 40 very carefully, 40 very quickly. Not carefully. More scanning. And yeah, there are advantages and disadvantages to skimming. So you're going to get through it faster. You might even get the big idea in a better way, big picture. But yeah, some books are probably meant to be read really slowly and processed, chewed on. And so much of the reading that we do that isn't books, whether it's scanning social media or all the advertisements around us, that is a scanning discipline, filtering, and should I pay attention to that?
And it does impact you in a total way. Yeah. I feel like I can get the big picture of a book by just looking at the table of contents,
Totally.
But I know that I'm not always a great judge of what content is going to be actually good for me and what's not, so I do struggle with, if I start scanning a book, like I basically decided this person's voice is not that important to me. I just want to get I want to get the gist of what they're wanting to say without really listening to what, and so that's kind of hard for me to kind of decide. I feel a bit guilty sometimes if I'm suddenly just scanning through a book or, and realize, I'm not actually listening very well to this. I'm just trying to get some, so it is interesting to think, like, how do you know when, the right time is to, this is a scanning book. This is a quick read versus this is I wonder how Dr. Keller worked through that,
Right. No, yeah, I appreciate what you're saying about not wanting to just dismiss a book by its cover, right? Or by its table of contents. However, there are so many books. We're never going to be able to read them all. There's more books to say no to than yes to. And so I think there does have to be a discipline, a cultivation of, hey, what's most important, and what might be helpful to me. And it might be a book I totally would maybe disagree with, but maybe it's good for me to be in conversation with that person and with those ideas. And that instead of reading a book that I totally agree with and say amen to everything in that book, it's going to maybe demand more of me to read the book that I disagree with. But there's one you recently recommended, or that you've been reading, that I recently started, and it's like, oh wow, this is really challenging me in some good ways.
Yeah, that Praying Like Monks, Living Like Fools. That one.
Oh no, it was actually it's a The Great Sex Rescue.
Oh yes.
That's what it is, right?
Yeah. Yep.
I was gonna say that sex book, but I thought I better clarify.
Yeah, clarify which one it is that we're recommending in these pastoral circles.
Don't Google that. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but it's a very interesting book on I don't know if you want to call it purity culture or maybe some of the things that some Christian communities have taught about sex and relationships, and very challenging, but in a good way.
Yeah, it's a good. Have you ever? I've seen that there is kind of this. I don't think it's new, but you can subscribe to these services that'll give you a book in like 10 or 15 minutes. Kind of a digest the main points. Have you ever made use of those?
I haven't. Maybe like once or twice. I love the idea. I think that could be a nice, like, because books are thorough. They're going to give you the journey, right? You're gonna climb the mountain. But sometimes maybe you just want to see the views. Yeah. So I think. Did you ever use Cliff Notes in school?
Oh, we think so.
Okay,
think so.
You were on the mission field. So like in high school,
only for like my childhood.
Okay,
so I spent plenty of time in public school and high school and elementary.
Okay, you were in high school. So like in high school, if they said, "Hey, you need to read 1984," right? You know, like I'm in high school, I don't want to read 1984. Yeah. You'd go to Cliff Notes or Shark Notes.
Sure,
they would give you
but you got to go to like Barnes and Nobles to go get.
So let's see. The internet was kind of coming in.
Yeah, I guess
it was because you're a few years older than me, right?
Yeah.
We had dial-up, but they were still.
Yeah, you remember dial-up, so you're old enough to remember dial-ups.
All that to say, I like the idea of book summaries. I think they can give you like a real good sense of the main points of the book, and then if you read it and you go, oh wow, that's really interesting. Maybe then you want to go read the whole book, or maybe you go, I think I got it. Most books can probably be read in summaries. But you probably need to go on the journey.
I heard someone talk about listening to one of these summaries and then kind of almost counting that as having read the book.
Oh, funny.
And I was like, oh,
is that unethical?
I don't know. Again, it depends on what your motivation is. Because I like fiction, especially science fiction, fantasy. After I had read the book Dune, and then I, went and saw the most recent adaptation of it on screen, and so I went back and got the book again. And what really surprised me, like I remember this, I know the story very well, and so I didn't think I was going to actually. I thought it would be another like I'll get it from the library, read a few pages, and then just not read it, as is often my habit. And I was caught by Frank Herbert's writing, and I was surprised by how much I was just enjoying sort of hearing him. I'm reading, but kind of hearing him put sentences together and choose words, and it was an art form. So there's almost there's so many books that I guess another question is everybody who's writing an artist? You kind of think about back in the day, the people who got the Mozarts and all the notoriety people that you study in high school from back in the day. There wasn't as much access to getting your work published, getting your work heard, and so there was a bit. I mean, of course, if you had power and influence, you're more likely to be able to get yourself published, whether you're good or not. But there was more room for like the geniuses to rise to the surface, right? Where today it can be relatively easy to make things sound and look good, especially if you have the resources to pay for a ghostwriter. So I guess it just makes me wonder. So that's maybe what I'm afraid of sometimes is if I just gloss through a book, like I might actually miss something beautiful in just the way the author chooses words, the way the author the syntax and diction and the phrasing and how they organize their ideas. Even visually on a page, when I write, I try to pay attention to even where the new paragraphs go and helping the reader to hear me, And so I guess that's one little bit of a pushback to consuming books really fast, or even using the summaries.
Sure.
Because you might miss something beautiful. You might get an idea, someone's idea, but you miss really,
Oh, for sure. And it's a lot of, it's kind of like when you read a book or you listen to a sermon or any kind of a talk, and maybe like the main point the author was going for, it might be helpful, but it might be something else they said, even in passing, or an illustration or whatever, that totally sparks your brain in different directions, and is maybe just a throwaway comment, but there's a lot that can happen in reading the whole book or listening to the whole sermon or whatever that is maybe bigger than just, like you said, the idea. But there are so many books. That's why I'm a fan of summaries, because you couldn't. And sometimes people are everyone's talking about this book. It's like, okay, well, let me familiarize myself with the basics. So I'm not going to tell people I read the book, but I know what
you're
the book's
aware
about.
of it and able to have a conversation about
Exactly.
it. So my last kind of controversial question is, from your point of view, should all leaders be readers?
Uh-oh, Josh. No. I think
Of course, we're not defining what a reader is. So that's kind of an unfair.
Sure. All leaders, good leaders, should be learners, for sure. Like, all good leaders should be listeners. I don't know how you could not be, with how fast the world's changing, how complicated people are. If we're not listening, if we're not learning, I think we're pretty quickly going to not be helpful to the people that we're leading. For me, books have been really helpful, but so have podcasts, conversations, blog posts, all sorts of different inputs. So, I wouldn't pigeonhole a leader and say you have to read hard copy books. I think they're helpful, but not the only way to be a lifelong learner.
Yeah, I like your clarification on reading as an act of listening, and you need to be a good listener if you want to be a good leader. My wife is more of the reader than I am, and she just read a book by Richard Foster called Humility. And there was one quote that she read on her whiteboard, and it was something to the gist of, like, humility is like almost a definition for humility: remaining teachable. I thought
I like that.
I think leaders should be humble, and I think that kind of ties in. Leaders should be open to learning, to being taught. So that's good. Well, to the leaders who are listening and interested in turning the volume up on their reading habit, what's some encouragement or caution that you would have for them?
Yeah, it's so easy to compare ourselves to others in this. It's like, oh, I could, even like you said, a lot of the should.
The spectrum right here is like, I consider myself a reader, but you've heard what my habit sounds like. So, like, I'm on one end of the spectrum. And so if you fall somewhere between Josh and Tyler, like, you're doing all right.
Sure. But what's funny, Josh, is like, I talk with you, I interact with you. You seem to me to be someone who is a lifelong learner. You're very emotionally aware of people around you, and you're a learner. So I think some of this is just different inputs. It's like, what kind of exercise should I do? The one you'll actually do, the one you'll enjoy. And what Bible translation should I read? The one you'll read.
So it's a good word. So try to turn down, if you're turning that habit up, make sure you're turning down your kind of temptation to compare yourself to other people's habits.
Sure.
Or what they look like.
Totally.
Okay.
Yeah. So I guess if you're wanting to grow in this area, I just carve out a small block of time. If it's in the morning, or if it's right before bed, read a page a day, a couple pages, 10 minutes, a chapter. Just start cultivating that. And if you're not loving the book, No, throw it away. Give it to Tyler. Yeah.
There we go.
Give it to Josh.
There we go. I'll take care of it for you.
So yeah, and yeah, I guess maybe this is do what works for you. If audiobooks work, awesome. If that's like what works in your schedule, cool.
Where are you finding your audiobooks?
Was it you who recommended Scribd?
Yeah, I call it Scribed.
Scribed. Yeah.
Yeah,
I've heard so many different
okay.
pronunciations.
Yeah. It's kind of a bit of an almost like a Netflix of audiobooks.
It's like a
you don't have to own
knockoff
it.
brand of Audible, but cheaper.
Yes. Yeah.
And you have digital, like Kindle kind of.
There's ebook options.
Thank you, ebook. So that's nice. So it's both, and it's I think $11 a month or something. But yeah, there's several different. There's free audio listening apps too. I think like LibriVox is a free one. A lot of people like Audible.
Library. I got to push the library, because I got a lot of good options.
Yeah, if you live in the city.
For you, so Scribed is working for you.
That's what I use. Yeah.
Yeah. And you have any caution for people? Like, have you seen within yourself as someone who have a habit of reading a lot of books? Sometimes our habits can really help us, and they can hinder us in some ways. What are some cautions that you might have for
Yeah, I mentioned that don't compare yourself. I also think, I'm learning how to not not finish a book. So if it's not really resonating, to quit. So some of us feel like we have to push through and finish that book. And maybe I don't. It's okay. Yeah. It's okay to not read it.
I need to remember to put my phone down when my kids are around. That's a struggle for me.
Yeah.
Do you you got a little one at home now, relatively newly married? Do you ever feel like this book is actually like a physical barrier between me and people around me, or have you just kind of taught yourself to not read when people are around?
No, it's true. I'll be and it might even be my Bible. I'm reading, and having my quiet time in the morning, and I hear my daughter wake up, and sometimes I'm excited to see her, but sometimes I'm like, oh man,
bad timing.
I'm trying to read my Bible here, trying to become a person more like Christ. Leave me alone. Yeah. It's like, wait a second. So trying to, hey man, this season's going to go by so fast, and there's something way more important than this book. The Bible's important, you know what I mean? More important than this time right here. And my daughter needs a dad. Yeah. My wife needs her husband. We need each other.
Yeah. And the Bible is prepping you for this moment right now.
Exactly. Exactly. And I might have used to view God as if you don't get your quiet time in that day, that you're a lesser Christian or something.
Yeah.
But
backsliding.
Yeah. But maybe just that freedom of I think God smiles on me putting my Bible down and playing with my daughter.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I even wrestled with that this morning, trying to work my way through a book, and then my wife and daughter doing this. It's causing noise. So yeah, people have to come before. I think books, which sounds funny, but that's one of my
before habits, right? Are the things that we turn to. Yeah. Yep.
Good word.
If the leader listening who wants to turn up the volume on their reading habits, if you had 3 books you'd want to recommend. I know you gave some earlier ones that stood out, and I'd probably say that should be on the list. The ones, if they're interested in what you have to recommend, you gave some recommendations earlier. Eugene Peterson, little height guy. I'll put them in the show notes. But those books there. Any other ones, or if you're going to help someone grow as a reader, with kind of some short books to help you get some momentum that are still pretty impactful. Would you have a list of 2 or 3 books that you would say, go pick these up, and these will kind of help you pick up some momentum and help you kind of catch the bug?
Yeah, that's a hard question. Not exactly knowing who's listening to this. Yeah. So it almost depends on who the person is and where they're at in their spiritual, intellectual, in whatever the journey they're on, the stage of life they're in. So I've noticed of myself, I recommend books that are as I as I like recommend, let's say books for a high school student who's trying to grow in their faith, I'm typically giving them books that are a little bit too above their head, I think. And I need to remember where I was in high school and the stuff that was really connecting with me. So yeah, I'm hesitant to even recommend books.
Sure.
But I think John Mark Comer is pretty accessible.
Yeah.
Live No Lies was an excellent book that is just such a good...
Is that Comer as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
Live No Lies by John Mark Comer. Not Live Not by Lies by Rod Dreher, which is also a pretty good book. But Live No Lies by John Mark Comer.
And this is... John Mark Comer is a ministry professional or a pastor. So, anything kind of outside of the immediate ministry Christian theologian kind of, is there a, you mentioned the one earlier about the why we're politically divided, but any other books come to mind kind of in that genre of not explicitly in church world?
Yeah. I mean, that book, Atomic Habits, is really making the rounds.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are finding that book really helpful. And I think it's awesome that even outside of the church, there's lots of conversations about habit formation and how important that is.
And the listener may notice how Tyler recommended like, even read one page, read one chapter. Like that's like straight out of things like Atomic Habits.
Yeah.
Or, so that's how some of these books on habits are forming you, and even how you give recommendations, like just find what works and do what works and kind of go from there.
Definitely.
Yeah. Any other thoughts that didn't quite find a place to fit, or questions that you kind of wish I had asked you was on the topic of books and being a reader and how your reading interacts with being a leader, being a dad?
No, I don't think so. I mean, again, reading in community. Like if you can read a book with someone else, you're more likely to finish it. You're more likely to talk about it, remember it, enjoy it, or quit together.
Yeah.
Do you like this book? No, me neither.
Yeah.
Let's find a different one.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think I already mentioned this, but just appreciated the time with our young pastors group and the books we get to read and the conversations we have.
I'm kind of the facilitator of that group. So I know that I need to show up having read the book. So there's something about, if you want to grow as a reader in a particular genre or topic, or like start a group of some kind, or have some kind of external accountability. Whether you volunteer to go give a talk on some topic at a retirement home or a school presentation kind of stuff. But me being the facilitator of our group makes me make sure I'm reading.
Right.
Yeah, so there's something about that. And I'm thankful for that. I do need that. So reading in community, or reading for community is a good word there. So that's it for me from what I got.
Thanks, John.
I appreciate you saying yes to this, and I look forward to seeing how God might use this conversation to nudge someone forward in their life of leadership. So thanks.
Thank you.